The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the general store just as Jake Thornton was loading supplies onto his wagon. And when the door opened to reveal a woman in a traveling dress clutching a carpet bag and a letter with his brother's handwriting on it, he knew his carefully ordered life was about to become very complicated. "Excuse me, sir," the woman said, her voice steady despite the dust coating her dark hair and the exhaustion evident in her green eyes. "I am looking for the Thornton Ranch. I was told someone would meet me here in Silver Creek, but it seems no one has come." Jake set down the sack of flour he had been holding and wiped his hands on his pants, his jaw tightening as he recognized the situation unfolding before him. It was August of 1876, and the Montana Territory town of Silver Creek was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, which meant half the town would hear about this before sundown. "You must be Eleanor Hayes." "I am," she said, relief flooding her features. "Then you must be Jake Thornton. I received your letter 3 months ago, and I have traveled all the way from Boston to become your wife." "My letter," Jake repeated, his voice flat. He had suspected as much ever since his younger brother, Charlie, had started acting guilty and evasive 2 weeks ago. "Miss Hayes, I hate to be the one to tell you this, but I never wrote you any letter. I never arranged for a mail-order bride, and I certainly never agreed to marry anyone." The color drained from Eleanor's face and she gripped her carpet bag tighter. "That is impossible. I have the letter right here. It is signed with your name, and it contains details about your ranch, your life, and your desire for a wife to help build a future in Montana Territory." Jake felt anger rising in his chest, not at this woman who had clearly been deceived, but at his meddling younger brother, who had apparently decided to take matters into his own hands. Charlie had been pestering him for months about finding a wife, saying the ranch needed a woman's touch, and that Jake was becoming too set in his ways at 29 years old. "Let me see that letter." Eleanor handed it over with trembling fingers, and Jake scanned the contents quickly. The handwriting was definitely Charlie's, though he had apparently practiced copying Jake's signature. The letter was full of romantic nonsense about wanting a partner to share the beauty of Montana with, about needing someone educated and capable to help run the ranch, about building a life together under the big sky. It made Jake sound like some kind of poet instead of the practical, hard-working rancher he actually was. "This was written by my brother Charlie," Jake said, handing the letter back. "He is 22 years old and apparently thinks he knows what is best for me. I am truly sorry you came all this way for nothing, Miss Hayes. I will pay for your return ticket to Boston and compensate you for your trouble." Eleanor's face had gone from pale to flushed, and her eyes glittered with what might have been tears or fury or both. "For nothing, I sold everything I owned to come here. I left behind a position as a schoolteacher. I said goodbye to the only city I have ever known, and I spent 3 weeks on trains and stagecoaches to reach this place, because I believed I was coming to start a new life with a man who wanted me here. I understand you are upset, but I cannot marry someone I do not know based on my brother's foolish scheme," Jake said, trying to keep his voice reasonable even as guilt twisted in his gut. "It would not be right for either of us. What would not be right is sending me back to Boston where I no longer have a home or a position," Eleanor said, her voice rising. "What would not be right is abandoning me here after your family lured me across the country with false promises." The store owner, Mr. Peterson, had emerged from his shop and was watching the scene with undisguised interest. Several other townspeople had also stopped to stare. Jake felt his face heating with embarrassment and frustration. "I will make sure you are taken care of, Miss Hayes. Come on, I will drive you out to the ranch and we can sort this out properly." "I am not going anywhere with a stranger who clearly does not want me around," Eleanor said stubbornly. "Well, you cannot stand in the street all day, and the hotel is no place for a lady alone," Jake shot back. At the ranch, my brother can explain himself and we can figure out a solution that works for everyone. Eleanor looked around at the curious faces watching them and seemed to realize she had little choice. Very well. But I want it understood that I am not leaving Montana territory without some kind of compensation for what your brother has done. Agreed, Jake said curtly. He helped her up onto the wagon seat, loaded her trunk in the back, and climbed up beside her. The ride out to the ranch was tense and silent, with Eleanor sitting stiffly on the far edge of the seat and Jake gripping the reins harder than necessary. The Thornton Ranch sprawled across a valley between two mountain ridges, with a main house, a bunkhouse, a barn, and several corrals. Jake had spent 7 years building it up from nothing after he and Charlie had come to Montana territory following their father's death. It was a good spread with fine grazing land and a creek that ran year-round, and Jake was proud of what he had accomplished. But as he pulled the wagon up to the house, he felt only anger at his brother for complicating everything. Charlie must have heard the wagon because he came out of the barn, his face breaking into a smile that died the moment he saw Eleanor sitting next to Jake. "Oh no," he said. "Oh yes," Jake said, climbing down and then helping Eleanor down despite her obvious reluctance to accept his assistance. "Miss Eleanor Hayes, meet my brother Charlie, the man who actually wrote you that letter." Eleanor turned to stare at Charlie, and Jake watched his brother squirm under her gaze. Charlie was a handsome young man with sandy hair and an easy smile, but right now he looked like he wanted to sink into the ground. "I can explain," Charlie said weakly. "You had better," Eleanor said, her voice cold, "because I have given up everything to come here based on lies." "They were not exactly lies," Charlie protested. "Everything I wrote about the ranch was true, and Jake really does need a wife, he just will not admit it." "Whether I need a wife or not is my decision to make, not yours," Jake said, his voice hard. "What possessed you to do something so stupid, Charlie?" "You have been alone since Sarah died 5 years ago," Charlie burst out. "You work yourself to exhaustion every day, you barely talk to anyone, and you are turning into a bitter old man before you have even reached 30. I thought if I could just find the right woman, someone smart and capable who could handle ranch life, maybe you would see that you could be happy again." Jake felt like he had been punched in the stomach. He did not talk about Sarah, not with Charlie or anyone else. She had been his wife for only 8 months before she died of fever, and the pain of losing her had nearly destroyed him. He had thrown himself into building the ranch because work was the only thing that kept the grief at bay. You had no right to bring Sarah into this. "Someone had to do something," Charlie said desperately. "You are my brother and I want you to be happy." "Excuse me," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through their argument. "But I am standing right here, and I would appreciate being treated as more than just a solution to your family problems. I am a person with my own life and my own feelings, and right now I am furious with both of you." Both men turned to look at her, and Jake felt a grudging respect for the way she stood her ground despite the difficult situation. "You have every right to be angry, Miss Hayes. This whole mess is not your fault." "No, it is not," Eleanor agreed. "But I am here now and I need to decide what to do next. When is the next stagecoach back east?" "Not for another week," Jake admitted. "The stage only comes through Silver Creek twice a month." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, and Jake saw her shoulders sag. "Then I suppose I will need somewhere to stay for a week. Is there a respectable boarding house in town?" "Mrs. Patterson runs a boarding house, but it is pretty rough," Charlie said. "Mostly miners and drifters stay there. You would be much more comfortable here at the ranch. We have a spare room and it would be proper since there are 2 of us here." "I am not staying here," Eleanor said firmly. "I will manage at the boarding house." "At least stay for supper," Charlie pleaded. "It is a long ride back to town, and you must be hungry after your journey." Let me cook you a decent meal as an apology for what I have done." Eleanor looked torn, and Jake found himself saying, "He is right about one thing. It is a long ride and you should eat something. Charlie is actually a pretty good cook." "Fine," Eleanor said. "One meal, then I want to be taken back to town." Charlie rushed off to start cooking, leaving Jake and Eleanor standing awkwardly in the yard. "Let me show you where you can wash up," Jake offered. He led her inside the house, which was simple but clean, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area and 2 bedrooms off to the sides. He showed her to the wash basin and left her alone, then went to find Charlie in the kitchen. "You are lucky she did not shoot you," Jake said in a low voice. I know, it was stupid," Charlie said as he worked on preparing steaks and potatoes. "But Jake, I really did try to find someone who would be perfect for you. I read through dozens of advertisements from ladies looking to come west. Eleanor is a schoolteacher, she is educated, she comes from a good family, and her letters were smart and funny. I thought you two would actually like each other if you just met. That is not how this works, Charlie. You cannot just order a wife like you order supplies from a catalog," Jake said, though his anger was starting to fade into exhaustion. "She has been hurt by this and she has every right to hate both of us." "I will make it right," Charlie promised. "I have money saved up. I will pay for her ticket home and give her enough to get settled again." Jake sighed and ran a hand through his dark hair. "We will both pay. This is a Thornton problem now." Eleanor emerged a few minutes later, looking slightly more composed with her face washed and her hair tidied. Charlie served up the meal, and they sat at the rough wooden table in uncomfortable silence for a few minutes before Eleanor spoke. "This is very good, Mr. Thornton. You really are a fine cook." "Thank you, Miss Hayes," Charlie said eagerly. "And please call me Charlie. I know I do not deserve your kindness after what I have done, but I truly am sorry." "Your brother says you are a school teacher," Jake said, trying to ease the tension. "What did you teach?" "Everything," Eleanor said with a slight smile. "It was a small school in a poor neighborhood of Boston. I taught children from ages 6 to 14, all in one room. Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and whatever else they needed to learn." "That sounds challenging," Jake said. "It was, but I loved it," Eleanor said, and for the first time since she had arrived, he saw genuine warmth in her expression. "Those children were hungry for knowledge, and teaching them felt like the most important thing I could do. When I received the letter supposedly from you, one of the things that appealed to me most was the idea that I could start a school out here. The letter mentioned that Silver Creek had no teacher and that the children of the area were growing up without education." Charlie had the grace to look ashamed. That part was true. "The town has been trying to raise money for a school, but they have not been able to afford a teacher." Eleanor looked thoughtful. "So there really is a need for a teacher here." "Desperately," Jake said. "There are at least 20 children in the area who should be in school. The ranchers around here know education is important, but nobody has the time or ability to teach properly." "How much would a teacher earn in a town like this?" Eleanor asked. "If the town council could actually hire one, probably room and board plus about $30 a month," Jake said. "Why do you ask?" "Because perhaps I do not need to return to Boston after all," Eleanor said slowly. "If I could establish myself as the teacher here, I could make a living and build a new life in Montana territory, just not the one I expected." Jake felt something shift in his chest as he looked at her determined face. She had spirit, he would give her that. Most women would have dissolved into tears or hysterics after what had happened, but Eleanor was already thinking of solutions. "The town council meets once a month. Their next meeting is in 2 days. I could introduce you to some of the council members, including the mayor." "That would be very helpful, thank you," Eleanor said. "In the meantime, I really should stay in town rather than impose on your hospitality any further." Please stay here tonight at least, Charlie said. It is already getting dark and Mrs. Patterson's boarding house really is not a nice place. You can have the spare room, and I give you my word as a gentleman that you will be perfectly safe and respected under this roof. Eleanor hesitated, and Jake added, He is right. It would not be safe or comfortable for you in town tonight. Tomorrow I will drive you in, and we can get you settled somewhere proper. Very well, Eleanor agreed. One night, and I want a lock on the door. There is a lock, Jake assured her, and you have my word that nobody will bother you. After supper, Eleanor retreated to the spare room, which had clearly been hastily prepared by Charlie with fresh linens and wildflowers in a jar on the small table. Jake and Charlie cleaned up the dishes, and once Eleanor's door was firmly closed, Jake turned to his brother. You know the town council may not agree to hire her. They have been talking about a teacher for months, but never actually doing anything about it. Then we need to make sure they do, Charlie said. It is the least we can do after what I put her through. What you put her through, Jake corrected. But yes, I agree. I will talk to Mayor Jameson and the others. If Eleanor wants to stay and teach, we should help make that possible. That night, Jake lay in his bed unable to sleep, thinking about the unexpected woman now sleeping under his roof. She was not at all what he would have expected a proper Boston schoolteacher to be. There was steel in her spine and fire in her eyes, and she had handled a situation that would have broken many women with remarkable grace. He found himself curious about her despite his determination not to be interested in any woman, especially one his brother had tried to force on him. The next morning, Jake woke early as always and went out to handle the ranch chores. When he came back in for breakfast, he found Eleanor already in the kitchen, cooking eggs and bacon while Charlie set the table. I hope you do not mind, she said. I wanted to earn my keep since I am staying the night. You did not have to do that, Jake said, surprised. I do not like being idle, Eleanor said simply. She served the breakfast efficiently, and Jake had to admit the food was excellent. As they ate, Eleanor asked intelligent questions about the ranch and the area, and Jake found himself actually enjoying the conversation. She was curious about everything from the cattle operation to the weather patterns, to the relationships between the ranchers and the few remaining Native American tribes in the region. After breakfast, Jake hitched up the wagon again and drove Eleanor into town, with Charlie coming along as well. They stopped first at Mayor Jameson's office. Henry Jameson was a former prospector who had struck it rich and decided to invest in Silver Creek's future. He was a practical man in his 50s who cared deeply about the town's development. Jake, Charlie, what brings you by? Jameson asked, then noticed Eleanor. And who is this young lady? Jake explained the situation, laying out the facts plainly while Eleanor stood quietly beside him. To his credit, Jameson did not laugh or make the situation worse. Instead, he looked at Eleanor with interest. So you are a trained schoolteacher looking for a position? I am, Eleanor said, stepping forward. I taught for 5 years at the Brigham Street School in Boston. I can provide references if needed, though it would take time for letters to arrive. I am qualified to teach all elementary subjects as well as intermediate mathematics and literature. We have been trying to start a school for over a year, Jameson said. The problem is we do not have a proper schoolhouse, and we could not offer much in the way of salary. The church has that back room that is not being used, Charlie said suddenly. Reverend Matthews said he would be happy to let it be used as a school. And several of the ranchers would probably be willing to contribute toward a teacher's salary if it meant their children could get a proper education, Jake added, surprising himself with his own enthusiasm for the idea. Jameson rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Let me talk to the other council members. Can you come back this afternoon, Miss Hayes? I should have an answer for you by then. Of course, Eleanor said. Thank you for considering my application. They left the mayor's office, and Charlie suggested they visit the church to see the potential schoolroom. Reverend Matthews was a kind man who welcomed them warmly and showed Eleanor the back room. It was dusty and full of stored items, but it was spacious with good windows and a solid floor. "If the town approves my position, I could have this ready to be a proper classroom within a week," Eleanor said, her eyes bright with excitement as she looked around the space. "Then let us hope they approve," Charlie said. They spent the rest of the morning visiting several of the nearby ranches to gauge interest in supporting a school. Jake introduced Eleanor to the Hayes family, who had 3 children, the Morgans with 4 and the Winstons with 2. Every family they visited was enthusiastic about the prospect of a real teacher, and several of the fathers promised to contribute either money or materials to help establish the school. By the time they returned to town that afternoon, Jake felt cautiously optimistic. Eleanor had impressed everyone they met with her knowledge and her clear dedication to education. When they met with Mayor Jameson again, he had news that made Eleanor's face light up with joy. "The council has agreed to hire you as Silver Creek's first official teacher," Jameson said. "We can offer you room and board at the boarding house plus $35 a month. It is not much, but it is the best we can do right now." "It is more than generous," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mayor Jameson. I promise I will work hard to prove worthy of your trust." "When can you start?" Jameson asked. "As soon as I have the schoolroom prepared," Eleanor said. "If I could begin cleaning and organizing tomorrow, I could be ready to welcome students within a week." "Excellent," Jameson said. "I will spread the word to the families in the area." As they left the mayor's office, Eleanor turned to Jake and Charlie with tears in her eyes. "I cannot believe this is happening. When I stepped off that stagecoach yesterday, I thought my life was ruined. Now I have a position and a purpose again." "You earned this yourself," Jake said. "Your qualifications and your passion for teaching are what convinced everyone. But you helped make it possible," Eleanor said. "Both of you. I know the situation that brought me here was wrong, but perhaps some good has come of it after all." Over the next week, Jake found himself making excuses to ride into town and check on Eleanor's progress with the school. He told himself he was just making sure she had everything she needed, that he was simply being a good neighbor. But the truth was he enjoyed talking with her. She was smart and funny, and she did not treat him with the pity or careful distance that most people in Silver Creek had adopted after Sarah's death. Eleanor transformed the dusty back room into a proper classroom with remarkable efficiency. She organized donated desks and benches, created a makeshift chalkboard from painted wood, and even started a small library with books collected from families around the area. Jake and Charlie helped with the heavy work, and Charlie in particular seemed eager to spend time around Eleanor, making Jake feel an unfamiliar twist of something that might have been jealousy. On the day the school officially opened, 15 children showed up with their parents. Jake attended the opening ceremony, standing at the back of the room as Eleanor welcomed her new students with warmth and enthusiasm. She had a natural way with the children, firm but kind, and within an hour she had assessed each child's abilities and begun organizing them into appropriate learning groups. "She is really something, is she not?" Charlie said quietly, standing beside Jake. "She is a good teacher," Jake agreed carefully. "That is not what I meant," Charlie said. "She is beautiful and smart and brave. Any man would be lucky to have her." Jake felt his jaw tighten. "If you are thinking of courting her yourself, you had better be serious about it. She has been through enough without you playing games." "I am not playing games," Charlie said, sounding hurt. "I like her, Jake, I like her a lot, and unlike you, I am not afraid to admit it." "I am not afraid," Jake said. "I am just not interested in complicating my life." But as the weeks passed, Jake had to admit that his life was already becoming complicated whether he wanted it to or not. Eleanor had settled into Silver Creek life with remarkable ease, becoming friends with many of the women in town and earning respect from the men. The school was thriving, with more children enrolling every week, and despite Jake's best efforts to keep his distance, he found himself drawn to Eleanor again and again. She was different from Sarah, who had been quiet and gentle and perfectly content to follow Jake's lead. Eleanor had opinions about everything, and she was not afraid to argue with him when she thought he was wrong. She challenged him in ways he had not experienced before, and while it was frustrating, it was also exhilarating. One Saturday afternoon in late September, a month after Eleanor had arrived, Jake rode into town to pick up supplies and found Eleanor standing outside the general store looking distressed. "What is wrong?" he asked, dismounting quickly. "I just received a letter from my sister in Boston," Eleanor said, holding up a piece of paper with a trembling hand. "She is getting married next month, and she wants me to come back for the wedding. But I cannot afford the train fare, and even if I could, I cannot leave the school for that long." "How important is this wedding to you?" Jake asked. "Margaret is my only sister and my closest friend," Eleanor said, blinking back tears. "We have always dreamed of being at each other's weddings. But I made a choice to come west, and I have to live with the consequences of that choice." Jake made a decision in that moment that surprised him. What if you had an escort for the journey? Someone to make sure you got to Boston and back safely and who could help cover the costs. Eleanor looked up at him with wide eyes. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I have not taken a break from the ranch in years, and maybe it is time I saw something besides Montana territory," Jake said. "Charlie can handle things here for a few weeks. If you want to go to your sister's wedding, I will take you." "Jake, I could not ask you to do that," Eleanor said, but hope was dawning in her face. "You are not asking, I am offering," Jake said. "We can leave next week if you want. The school can take a short break. I am sure the families will understand." Eleanor surprised him by throwing her arms around him in a quick, impulsive hug. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "You have no idea what this means to me." Jake stood frozen for a moment, acutely aware of her warmth and the scent of lavender in her hair, before awkwardly patting her back. "You are welcome. Now let us go tell Charlie he is going to be in charge of the ranch for a while." The journey to Boston took over a week by train, and Jake found that traveling with Eleanor was an adventure in itself. She was endlessly curious about everything they passed, asking questions and making observations that forced Jake to see the landscape with fresh eyes. They sat together on the train, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence as they watched the country roll by. In the evenings, when they stopped at hotels along the way, Jake found himself lying awake thinking about the woman in the next room. He had not felt this way since Sarah, this combination of nervous energy and excitement and fear. He was afraid of being hurt again, afraid of opening his heart to someone who might leave or who fate might take away. But he was also beginning to realize that Eleanor was becoming important to him, and he was not sure he could stop it even if he wanted to. When they finally reached Boston, Eleanor's family welcomed them warmly despite their confusion about who Jake was and how Eleanor had ended up in Montana territory. Eleanor's sister Margaret was a sweet young woman who reminded Jake of Sarah, which made him realize that Eleanor was actually nothing like his late wife. Eleanor was fiercer, more independent, more challenging, and he was falling for her. The wedding was lovely, and Jake found himself standing in the church watching Eleanor smile as her sister exchanged vows. He wondered what Eleanor was thinking, if she regretted the marriage that might have been if Charlie's scheme had worked out differently. After the ceremony at the reception, Margaret pulled Jake aside. "My sister speaks very highly of you," Margaret said. "She says you saved her when she had nothing." She saved herself, Jake said honestly. I just helped a little. She also says she thinks about staying in Montana territory permanently, Margaret continued. That she has built a life there that matters to her, but I wonder if there might be another reason she wants to stay. Jake met Margaret's knowing gaze and felt his face heat. Your sister is a remarkable woman. Any man would be lucky to have her in his life. But are you that man? Margaret asked gently. Because Eleanor has been hurt before, and I do not want to see her hurt again. She has been hurt before, Jake asked, surprised. She was engaged once, to a man she thought loved her, Margaret said. But he broke it off when he found out our father had lost his money in a bad investment. He said he could not afford to marry a woman without a dowry. It broke Eleanor's heart and made her wary of trusting men. That is part of why she was willing to take a chance on a mail-order marriage. She thought it would be a practical arrangement that could not hurt her. Jake felt anger on Eleanor's behalf. She deserves better than that. Yes, she does, Margaret agreed. So if you have feelings for my sister, Jake Thornton, you had better be prepared to prove to her that you are different from the man who broke her heart. The conversation stayed with Jake as they spent a few days in Boston before beginning the journey back west. On the train heading home, Eleanor seemed quieter than usual, and Jake finally asked what was wrong. I am wondering if I made the right choice, Eleanor admitted. Seeing Margaret so happy, seeing my old life, it made me question everything. What if I have made a terrible mistake by staying in Montana? Do you miss Boston? Jake asked. I miss my family, Eleanor said. But Boston itself? No, I do not miss the crowded streets or the pollution or the way everyone is always in a hurry. And I certainly do not miss the small-minded people who look down on me for working instead of finding a husband. The school in Silver Creek is important, Jake said. The children there need you. Is that the only reason you want me to stay? Eleanor asked quietly, not meeting his eyes. Because I am useful to the community. Jake felt his heart pounding. This was the moment he realized. He could play it safe, agree that yes, the school was important and leave it at that, or he could take a risk and tell her the truth. No, he said finally, that is not the only reason. Eleanor turned to look at him, her green eyes searching his face. Then what is the real reason? Because I have gotten used to having you around, Jake said, the words coming slowly as he tried to articulate feelings he had been denying for weeks. Because you make me laugh and you make me think, and you make me feel alive in a way I have not felt in years. Because when I imagine the ranch without you nearby, when I think about not seeing you at church or running into you at the general store or hearing about what the children are learning at school, everything feels empty. Jake, Eleanor whispered, her eyes filling with tears. I am not good at this, Jake continued, feeling clumsy and exposed. I have not courted anyone since Sarah, and I do not know if I even remember how. But I know that I care about you, Eleanor Hayes. I care about you more than I wanted to, more than I planned to, and definitely more than is convenient. Eleanor laughed, a watery sound that was half sob. You care about me even though your brother had to trick me into coming to Montana. I care about you because of who you are, not because of how you arrived, Jake said. You are brave and smart and stubborn and beautiful, and somewhere along the way I stopped being angry about the situation and started being grateful for it. I care about you too, Eleanor said softly. I have been trying not to because I was afraid. After what happened with my former fiancé, I promised myself I would never put my heart at risk again. But you make me want to take that risk, Jake. You make me want to believe in love again. Jake reached across the space between them and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around her smaller ones. Then maybe we can take that risk together, slowly if you want. No pressure, no expectations, just two people getting to know each other and seeing where it leads. I would like that, Eleanor said, smiling through her tears. I would like that very much. The rest of the journey home felt different, charged with a new energy and possibility. They held hands when no one was looking, and they talked about everything from childhood memories to dreams for the future. By the time they arrived back in Silver Creek, Jake knew he was in love with Eleanor Hayes, and he was fairly certain she felt the same way about him. Charlie was thrilled when he figured out what had happened between them. "I knew it," he crowed. "I knew you two were perfect for each other." "Do not let this go to your head," Jake warned. "What you did was still wrong, even if it worked out in the end." I know," Charlie said, grinning, "but you have to admit I was right about Eleanor being special." Over the following months, Jake courted Eleanor properly. He picked her up after school and drove her back to the boarding house. He took her on picnics by the creek and rides through the mountains. He attended school events and watched with pride as she shaped the minds of Silver Creek's children. And slowly, carefully, they built a relationship based on trust and respect and genuine affection. Eleanor met the challenges of frontier life with the same determination she brought to everything else. When a family of homesteaders arrived with children who spoke only German, she taught herself basic German to help them learn English. When one of her students showed talent for mathematics, she borrowed advanced textbooks and taught him beyond the standard curriculum. When a late October snowstorm threatened to keep children from school, she organized a system where students who lived near each other could travel together for safety. Jake watched her adapt and thrive, and he fell more in love with her every day. But he was also aware that they had not talked about the future, not explicitly. Eleanor was still living at the boarding house, still maintaining her independence. He wanted to ask her to marry him, but he was afraid of pushing too hard or too fast. It was Charlie who finally pushed him into action in early December. "Are you going to propose to her or not?" Charlie demanded one evening as they sat by the fire. "Because if you are not serious about her, you need to let her go so she can find someone who is." "Of course I am serious about her," Jake said, irritated. "I am just trying to do this right." "You are trying to protect yourself from getting hurt again," Charlie said bluntly. "But Jake, you cannot live your whole life afraid. Sarah would not have wanted that for you." Jake stared into the fire, feeling the truth of his brother's words. "What if I lose her the way I lost Sarah?" "What if you do not?" Charlie countered. "What if you have 50 years together? Are you willing to give up that possibility just because you are afraid?" Jake knew his brother was right. The next day, he rode into town and bought a simple gold ring from the jeweler. Then he spent the next week trying to figure out the right way to propose. He wanted it to be special, meaningful, something Eleanor would remember forever. His opportunity came on a Saturday in mid-December. Jake invited Eleanor to come to the ranch for the day, promising her a surprise. When she arrived, he helped her onto a horse and led her up into the hills behind the ranch. They rode for about an hour until they reached a high meadow with a view that stretched for miles in every direction. The mountains were covered in snow, and the sky was bright blue and endless. "This is beautiful," Eleanor breathed, dismounting and walking to the edge of the meadow. "This is my favorite place on the ranch," Jake said, coming to stand beside her. "I come here when I need to think or when I need to remember why I love this land. I wanted to share it with you." "Thank you for bringing me here," Eleanor said, slipping her hand into his. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something," Jake said, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "When you first arrived in Silver Creek, I was angry and resentful. I thought you were going to complicate my life and mess up everything I had built, and I was right. You did complicate everything. You made me feel things I had convinced myself I would never feel again. You made me hope and dream and plan for a future I had given up on. You challenged me and frustrated me, and made me realize that the life I thought was enough was actually pretty lonely." Eleanor was looking up at him with shining eyes, and Jake took a deep breath before continuing. I know we have only known each other for 4 months, and I know our beginning was unconventional to say the least. But I also know that I love you, Eleanor Hayes. I love your strength and your passion and your stubbornness. I love the way you care about your students and the way you are not afraid to argue with me when you think I am wrong. I love who I am when I am with you, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore. He pulled the ring from his pocket and dropped to one knee in the snow-dusted grass. Will you marry me? Not because my brother arranged it, not because it is practical or convenient, but because we love each other and we want to build a life together. Yes, Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, Jake Thornton, I will marry you. I love you too, more than I thought I could ever love anyone. You have given me a home and a purpose and a reason to believe in happy endings again. Jake stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her for the first time there in the meadow with the mountains as their witness. It was a kiss full of promise and passion, and the sweetness of finally acknowledging what had been growing between them for months. They were married on Christmas Eve in the Silver Creek Church, surrounded by the community that had embraced Eleanor. Margaret and her new husband made the long journey from Boston to attend, and Charlie stood as Jake's best man with a satisfied smile on his face. Eleanor wore a dress of deep blue velvet that Margaret had brought from Boston, and she carried a bouquet of evergreen branches tied with white ribbon. As Jake stood at the altar watching Eleanor walk toward him, he felt Sarah's memory settle into a peaceful place in his heart. He would always love her and remember her, but Eleanor was his future. This fierce, beautiful, stubborn woman who had arrived in his life, unexpectedly, was the partner he had not known he needed. Eleanor moved into the ranch house after the wedding, and she immediately began making it a home. She added curtains and rugs, started a garden plot for the spring, and filled the empty spaces with warmth and laughter. Charlie moved into the bunkhouse to give them privacy, though he still took most of his meals at the main house. The first months of their marriage were a period of adjustment as they learned to navigate living together. Eleanor was neater than Jake and had firm opinions about how the household should be run. Jake was used to making all his own decisions and had to learn to consult with his wife. They had their share of disagreements, some of them heated, but they also learned to communicate and compromise. Eleanor continued teaching through the winter, and Jake supported her work fully even though it meant sometimes having supper late or coming home to find his wife exhausted from dealing with difficult students or demanding parents. He attended school programs and helped build new shelves for the growing library. He took pride in being known as the schoolteacher's husband. In early spring, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. Jake was overjoyed and terrified in equal measure, memories of Sarah's death making him almost paralyzed with fear. But Eleanor faced pregnancy with her usual practical determination, following the doctor's orders and taking care of herself, while still maintaining her teaching schedule as long as she could. As her pregnancy progressed, the town rallied around them. The women organized a quilting bee to make baby blankets and clothes. Mayor Jameson hired a temporary teacher so Eleanor could take time off before and after the birth. And Jake found himself surrounded by advice from every parent in the area, much of it contradictory and all of it well-meaning. Eleanor taught through May and then reluctantly handed her classroom over to Miss Sarah Johnson, a young teacher who had just arrived from Denver. On a warm June morning in 1877, with Jake holding her hand and Charlie pacing nervously outside, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after Jake's father. Holding his son for the first time, Jake felt a rush of love so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. This tiny person was the future, a living symbol of his and Eleanor's love. And Eleanor, exhausted but radiant, smiled at him with such joy that Jake knew they had truly found their happy ending. Eleanor stayed home with Thomas for 3 months before gradually returning to teaching, bringing the baby with her to school when he was small enough to sleep through the lessons. The children adored having a baby in the classroom, and the older girls competed for the chance to help look after him during recess. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Jake and Charlie expanded the herd and took on 2 hired hands to help with the increased work. Eleanor taught during the school year and helped with ranch business during the summers. Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, curious and energetic, and loved by everyone who met him. 2 years after Thomas was born, Eleanor gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Rose. The births were difficult, and for several terrifying hours Jake feared he might lose his wife. But Eleanor fought through, and while her recovery took months, she eventually regained her full strength. Jake hired a young woman named Mary to help with the children and the household so Eleanor would not wear herself out. The school continued to grow and thrive. By 1880, there were 40 students enrolled, and Eleanor had trained 2 assistant teachers to help manage the increased numbers. Silver Creek was growing from a rough frontier town into a proper community, with new businesses opening and families settling in the area. Eleanor served on the town council and organized a library association. She became one of the most respected and influential people in Silver Creek, and Jake could not have been prouder. Charlie eventually married a widow named Rebecca who arrived in Silver Creek with 2 young children. She was a kind, practical woman who appreciated Charlie's good humor and work ethic. They settled into the bunkhouse, which they expanded into a proper cottage, and Charlie continued to work the ranch with Jake while Rebecca helped Eleanor with the school and children. As the years passed, Jake watched his children grow and his ranch prosper. Thomas proved to have a natural talent with horses and started training colts when he was only 12. Emma showed a gift for music, and Jake bought a piano that was shipped from Chicago at enormous expense. Rose inherited her mother's love of books and announced at age 10 that she wanted to be a teacher just like her mother. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jake took Eleanor back to the meadow where he had proposed. They rode up together on a warm December day, leaving the children in Rebecca's care. Standing in the same spot where they had pledged their love, Jake pulled his wife close. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Coming west, staying here, building this life?" "Not for a single moment," Eleanor said firmly. "This is where I was meant to be. With you, with our children, with this community." Everything that happened, even Charlie's ridiculous scheme, led me exactly where I needed to go. "I was so angry when you arrived," Jake said, shaking his head at the memory. "I could not imagine anything worse than being forced into marriage with a stranger." "And now?" Eleanor asked, smiling up at him. "Now I cannot imagine anything better than spending every day with you," Jake said simply. "You are my partner, my best friend, my love. You took a broken man and helped him learn to live again. You gave me a family and a future I never thought I would have." "We gave each other those things," Eleanor corrected gently. "You gave me a home and a purpose and a love I never dreamed was possible. We built this life together, Jake. Everything we have, we created side by side." They stood together in the meadow for a long time, watching the mountains and remembering the journey that had brought them to this moment. When they finally rode back down to the ranch, they found their children waiting with a celebration that Rebecca and Charlie had secretly organized. There was a special supper with all their favorite foods and handmade gifts from each child. Thomas gave his father a bridle he had tooled himself with elaborate designs. Emma performed a new song she had learned on the piano. Rose presented her mother with a poem she had written about family and love and the beauty of Montana. And little 4-year-old Samuel, born unexpectedly 3 years after the twins, drew a picture of the whole family standing in front of the ranch house. As Jake looked around the table at his family, his heart felt full to overflowing. This was what mattered, he realized. Not the size of the herd or the success of the ranch, though those things were important. What truly mattered was love and connection, and the people you chose to share your life with. Years continued to pass in the way they do, bringing change and growth and occasional sorrow, but more often joy. Jake's hair turned gray, and his body bore the marks of decades of hard physical labor. But he still rode out every day to check on the cattle and the land he loved. Eleanor eventually retired from active teaching in her 50s, but she continued to serve on the school board and mentor young teachers. She also started writing textbooks specifically designed for frontier schools, and her books were eventually used throughout the Western Territories. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch operations, proving to be an even better rancher than his father. He married a rancher's daughter from the next valley and brought her to live in a new house they built on Thornton land. Emma married a musician and moved to Denver, where she taught piano and performed in concert halls. Rose became a teacher as she had dreamed and eventually took over as head of the Silver Creek School. Samuel, the surprise baby, became a veterinarian and settled in town where he cared for the animals of the entire region. Charlie and Rebecca raised her 2 children along with 3 more of their own, and the cousins grew up more like siblings, running wild over the ranch lands and getting into the kinds of trouble that make for good stories later. Charlie remained Jake's partner in the ranch until they were both old men, and their friendship deepened over the years into something unbreakable. On a summer evening in 1906, Jake and Eleanor sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. They were both in their 70s now, their children grown and their grandchildren running around the yard. Jake held Eleanor's hand, his thumb tracing the path it had traced thousands of times over the decades. "Do you remember the day you arrived?" Jake asked, though he knew Eleanor remembered as clearly as he did. "I remember thinking my life was over," Eleanor said. "I remember being so angry and so afraid. And I remember seeing you standing there looking just as angry and just as afraid." "Best day of my life," Jake said, though I sure did not know it at the time. "Best day of mine, too," Eleanor agreed. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and the stars began to appear. Jake thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that awkward, angry first meeting to this peaceful moment surrounded by the fruits of their life together. He thought about all the challenges they had faced and overcome, all the joys they had shared, all the love they had given and received. "I love you, Eleanor Thornton," Jake said quietly. "Today and always." "I love you too, Jake," Eleanor replied. "Thank you for giving me a life more wonderful than I ever imagined." They sat on the porch as the night deepened, 2 people who had started as strangers thrown together by circumstance and had become true partners in every sense of the word. Around them, their family laughed and played, carrying on the legacy of love that Jake and Eleanor had built together. The ranch stretched out into the darkness, solid and enduring, a testament to hard work and dedication. And in that moment, with his wife beside him and his family around him, Jake Thornton knew that he was the luckiest man who had ever lived. The mail-order bride he had refused had arrived anyway and changed everything, just as the title of their story promised. She had brought love and light into his world, and together they had built something that would last long after they were gone. It was a good life, a full life, and as the stars wheeled overhead and Eleanor's hand warm in his, Jake felt nothing but gratitude for every moment of the journey they had shared.